Dr. Sharon, I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing?
You know what? I'm doing great. And I'm happy that you invited me today.
Yes, I'm so happy to have this conversation. It's overdue, and this month of May, we are really focusing in on the physical health of Black women. So, you are the perfect guest to kick us off as we actually speak with a doctor. In your background, you guys have heard your impressive background. And really, for me, it's about the awareness piece, which intersects with the point of your book, Grown Woman Talk, about what we need to know about our health. And so I want to dive right in and get into the fact that this whole book's about being proactive. It's not reactive. It's like, how do you avoid the pitfalls that happen to Black women? And so I wanted to just start with, like, what are the myths that you think Black women are kind of trapped by when it comes to their health?
Well, I think there are a couple of myths. One is that we sort of live under this trope of the strong Black woman. We don't experience things quite at the same level that the majority population does. Particularly when it comes to mental health and our physical health, we don't pay as much attention as we should. I think we also don't pay enough attention to the fact that, as I say a lot in the book, genetics is not destiny. And just because you have a family history of a certain condition, and any Black person has a family history of high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, that does not mean that is your destiny. And that is really the focus of the book, is really to tell you that just because these things are part of your family tree does not mean that is your destiny. And I sort of talk about all the things that you can do to avoid it.
And I think that's really important because I do think there's a certain level of accepting in the negative. It's just like, this is inevitable. If my mom had diabetes, I'm going to get diabetes. If my mom or my father had high cholesterol, that's just the way it's got to be. And it is important to know, because if you feel powerless about that, you're not going to do anything to prevent it.
That's exactly right. And I think that when, I talk a lot about how the importance of knowing your family history, and it is important to know it, but not to be discouraged by it, because I think that your family history sort of gives you an idea of the things that you are predisposed to. But as family members, we share a lot more than just our genes. We share our environments, we share lifestyles, habits, the types of things we eat, our behaviors that are equally as important, if not more so, to our long-term health than just what's in our genes. So I want you to think of family history as this. It's important, but think of it like it's a road sign. And if you think of it, you say it tells you what you are predisposed to or what may be coming up in your future if you don't take actions to avoid it. And I use this analogy a lot. It's like if you were driving down the road and you saw a sign up that said bridge out ahead, you don't put your foot on the gas and keep driving. No, you would either slow up, or better still, to figure out a way to stop and turn that car around. And the same thing applies to our family history and our health history. It helps you know what things could potentially be in your future. And the earlier you heed that warning, the more you're able to avoid it in the future.
Agreed. And such an important message that people need to understand. And there's things that you said, like you said, it's not your destiny, but there are things that you could help make that destiny a reality or avoid it altogether, turn around from that bridge that's out, or at least slow it down. And that leads me to the other thing you talk about in this book. You talk about chronic stress. Like, when we talk about some of the things that will accelerate you getting to that destiny, and also just looking at, intergenerational trauma and the stress that our families have dealt with, particularly when we look like our mothers and our grandmothers, that's a factor in why people are as unhealthy as they are. And so I wanted to have you talk a little bit more about how you think chronic stress really impacts someone's health long term.
Chronic stress is toxic. And let me say that again. Chronic stress is toxic. I mean, we have an entire mechanism in our bodies that really sort of activates us in situations of acute stress. And it's important. You've got to get your blood sugar up. You've got to get your adrenaline up. You've got to be heightened, be on that heightened awareness such you can move quickly and mobilize. Well, that's a good thing when you're trying to save a baby from a burning building. That is not a good thing when that's where you live every day. And what we do know about a lot of the things that we attribute to race in terms of our health outcomes, particularly heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, things that are associated with race, it's not really so much race. It sort of gets back to this notion of the chronic stress issue in our lives. Because when you are stressed, you raise your blood pressure goes up, your blood sugar goes up, just sort of how you feel chronically, it wears on your body. Let's just say this. And so these things, when you are chronically stressed, you don't sleep well. You don't sleep well. You're more, when you don't have a good night's sleep, you're more likely to be not at your best the next day. So, you're foggy, you're unproductive, you're fatigued. And not only that, but when you sort of feel that way every day, it blunts your sense of what's normal and how you're supposed to feel. And that's something that I talk about a lot too in my book, is this notion of suffering and how we as women in general, and Black women in particular, are sort of, we become inured to that. We just feel like, well, suffering, that's what women do. We suffer through cramps. We suffer with childbirth, through heartbreak, through all of these things that are just, that we take as normal, and it's not. And I want to change the narrative about this suffering. And I want women to think that, your expectation should not be, as you get older, things get more difficult and harder and you should feel worse. I want you to feel your best self. And part of that is getting back to this issue of chronic stress, because as I said, chronic stress disturbs your sleep, which, disturbs your productivity, raises your blood pressure. And when you're sleepy and you have this chronically high levels of cortisol, which raise your blood sugar as well, it makes you make bad choices in terms of what you eat the next day. So guess what else? That leads to obesity. It leads to lack of activity, because if you're not feeling well, you're tired, you're less likely to exercise than anybody. So all of these things, you can't talk about chronic stress and not think of them in isolation. They all go together, and one thing really leads to the other and leads to the other, which ultimately ends up with bad health outcomes.
Beautifully said. And I want to unpack, you said a lot of very important information that I want to unpack a little bit. One, I want to go back to the very first time you spoke and you talked about the strong Black woman syndrome, right? That so many Black women, and this podcast is all about unlearning that. That's literally the crux of the podcast. Like, we were going to opt out of struggle here. But when you believe your life, that what is tied up into that is this belief that suffering is normal, that is the way it should be. And if you see a legacy of that, right? And it made me think of, too, as you were talking, that famous quote, I think it's by Zora Neale Hurston, that said, if you're silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it.
Right.
And when we look at the world today, and just the recent news stories of Black women who have been chronically ill and underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, people who come too late to the doctor, said, I spoke to the doctor, and they said, I didn't hear you, right? And it's because we've calibrated ourselves to not know what is normal and what is not. We just assume all of it's normal.
Right. And, I can tell you, because one of the ways that I sort of make this message clear in my book is I do a lot of storytelling, and I tell some stories. I tell a lot of family stories, and I tell some stories of my patients. And when I talk about sort of recalibrating the sense of what's normal, I lost my mother to cancer. She was only 57 years old when she died. And there is no question in my mind that long before she was diagnosed, she had some warning signs. She was, I'm sure she had pain. She had other things that she didn't know to go and seek help for. And also, there's this notion of like this again, this strong Black woman thing. I can endure it. I will suffer through it. I will just, if I just ignore this pain, it will go away. Those things get in the way. They get in the way of us seeking care when we should seek care. But then there's the other side of this. There's also, when we do seek care, of not being seen and heard by people in the medical profession, because they're the same thing. We minimize our pain and discomfort. And then a lot of times people in the medical community will minimize your pain and discomfort as well. And the one message that I give women, all women, is this: do not let other people tell you how you feel. Okay. And if I say this again, because there's a lot of gaslighting that gets out there, and if I think, if I think as a medical professional, I encounter someone and I have already made assumptions about, oh, this person is being overly dramatic, or they always complain, or, if I'm minimizing and that person is doing that to you, then I want to give you all the information that you need to be able to speak up and advocate for yourself. Because at the end of the day, nobody knows how you feel other than you. You are the expert here. And when you let someone tell you, oh, you're fine, and you don't feel fine, then that's your time you have two options. You can either go back to that person and advocate for yourself, or you can find someone else. But at the end of the day, the common thread in all of these stories that we hear, either about maternal health issues or women who've gone in and been told, they complain about one thing and they're told something else, or told to go home. No, that doesn't work. Only if you are given a very finite window. Because, I used to tell my patients this. A lot of times I don't always know the answer. You come in, you say, oh, this hurts or that hurts. And I do my due diligence and I try to figure out what's wrong. And I say to them, you know what? I don't see anything right this minute. I don't say you don't have anything. I believe you. But I can't figure it out right now. And we leave with a plan. And that plan would be, all right, let's give this 2 or 3 days, a week. Either this is getting better or it's not. And if it's not, then just because I don't know the answer doesn't mean the answer is unknowable. We're going to escalate it and take it to the next step. And I think a lot of people sort of miss that step when someone says, well, I don't know what it is. I did the test and everything looks fine. That doesn't mean everything is fine. That means I don't know just yet. So this is what I'm saying. Don't leave it, and use that power and that information that you have that no one else can know but you. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right.
So important to highlight that, and that's where we're going to lead us to when we come back, because I want to talk to you about the power of storytelling. One of the key themes in this book, and like one of the key takeaways for me when I read it, was how to better communicate with my provider. And story, you tell stories about your own life and your own family, and it's very enjoyable and entertaining and digestible. But also, while you're telling the stories, you're teaching us as the reader how to tell our story, particularly when it comes to the medical field. And so when we come back, I want to hear about the power of storytelling, learn from you, how we can become better storytellers to our doctors. So we'll be back with some more with Dr. Sharon.